Have you ever wondered if the ideas we debate as a society truly compete freely in the open market of public opinion? Or is it possible that our national conversations are carefully, deliberately manufactured from the top down? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are unpacking a highly provocative analysis by Rigoberto Tiglao titled The Ruling Class's Propaganda Core. It's a fascinating, hard-hitting piece. He takes established political and media theories and applies them directly to the modern Philippine political landscape. Now look, we aren't here to take sides today. Instead, we're going to break down his specific arguments and understand exactly how he views the intersection of wealth, media, and power.
To do this, we've broken things down into 5 key areas. We'll kick things off with manufacturing consent, looking at some dense political philosophy. Then we'll examine the modern propaganda core before applying those concepts to the Philippine media landscape. After that, we'll dive into what Tiglao calls singing in unison. And finally, we'll wrap up by exploring the ultimate endgame in normalizing the abnormal. Let's dive in.
All right, part 1, manufacturing consent and the philosophical foundations of power.
So, to really understand Tiglao's grievances with current events, we first have to look at the theoretical foundation he's building on. And it's rooted in Marxist theory, popularized by the American thinker Noam Chomsky in his famous work Manufacturing Consent. The core argument goes something like this. The great myth of democracy is that ideas compete freely, which allows everyday people to just independently discover the truth. But the reality, according to this framework, is completely different. Tiglao argues that the ruling elite dominate national discourse for one very simple reason. They command the material resources to do so. Basically, whoever holds the purse strings controls the means of mental production. They ensure that their specific view of society is embraced by the masses, ultimately to justify their continued rule. To explain who actually does this work, Tiglao borrows a term from the philosopher Antonio Gramsci, organic intellectuals. See, it isn't the political leaders themselves doing the heavy lifting of propaganda. Instead, it's a specific stratum of society. We're talking journalists, professors, jurists, and the clergy. Their job is to take the elite's interests and dress them up nicely in the language of morality, reason, and the public good. And this is a really crucial point. Tiglao believes these individuals aren't necessarily paid-off, mustache-twirling villains. Actually, this whole system works best because most of these people are completely sincere. They genuinely believe they're just telling the truth, which makes them incredibly effective at manufacturing the frame of what becomes acceptable public opinion.
Moving right along to part 2, the modern propaganda core, from the pulpit to the newsroom.
Here, Tiglao makes a really interesting historical argument about how the job of justifying the ruling class has evolved over time. Think about feudalism. Back then, the ruling class was legitimized by the clergy, right? Priests stood in pulpits and taught that a lord's dominion was literally ordained by heaven. Fast forward to modern capitalism, and Tiglao asserts that this function hasn't been abolished at all. It's just been reassigned. Today, the cathedral has given way to the newsroom, and the pulpit has been replaced by the opinion column. Modern elites are legitimized by media figures and intellectuals who claim to speak for reason, democracy, and the public interest. So the outfits have changed, but according to the author, the core job of protecting the powerful remains exactly the same.
Which brings us to part 3, the Philippine media landscape, where we apply this theory to reality. So let's move from abstract political theory to a highly charged, very specific mapping of today's Philippines. Here is how Tiglao categorizes the major print media. The Philippine Daily Inquirer used to be, in his words, the most powerful instrument of the ruling elite, specifically the Yellows. But after facing financial pressures during populist presidencies, he says it has really mellowed out and now relies heavily on advertorials. He then points to the Philippine Star, which he argues has taken up the vanguard role. He asserts the Star is owned by a massive conglomerate that's subject to heavy government regulation. That means they simply cannot risk antagonizing the current administration, which he claims results in columnists who just mouth the administration's views. Finally, he characterizes the Manila Bulletin as an idiosyncratic outlier, essentially a wild card with a vastly diverse set of columnists, ranging from government propagandists all the way to anti-establishment Marxists. But wait, this propaganda core isn't just limited to newspapers. Tiglao's definition casts a much wider net. He claims the overarching elite in this era is actually the United States. Therefore, he includes U.S.-educated university faculty, as well as media organizations like Rappler, the PCIJ, and CMFR, which he notes receive U.S. funding through entities like the National Endowment for Democracy.
He also specifically names former magistrate Antonio Carpio and Liberal Party stalwart Franklin Drilon as key non-media manufacturers of content. Interestingly enough, he even includes historically anti-establishment groups in this mix, like parliamentary leftists, vocal church clerics, and the Pinks. He argues that they have remarkably swelled the ranks of this exact same propaganda corps in recent years.
Okay, part 4. Singing in unison, the evidence of the echo chamber.
You might be wondering, how do you actually identify this corp in action? Well, Tiglao asserts that you can spot this elite group because they always adopt the exact same narrative. They sing in total unison on highly volatile issues. And he lists several specific examples. On the South China Sea dispute, he claims they treat the 2016 arbitral award as holy writ and frame any attempt at negotiation as outright treason. When it comes to Vice President Sara Duterte, they push a completely unified narrative for her immediate impeachment, which Tiglao argues is actually just a calculated move to prevent a Duterte restoration in 2028. He cites their uniform support for the ICC probe into Rodrigo Duterte, their past unanimous backing of Chief Justice Renato Corona's 2012 conviction, and their really quick dismissal of graft claims made by 18 ex-soldiers as a mere manufactured spectacle. To Tiglao, this absolute lack of dissenting opinion among the elite is undeniable proof of an echo chamber designed to protect very specific power interests.
Now, let's see how all of this builds into his most detailed recent example, the highly controversial installation of Sherwin Gachalian as Senate President.
Tiglao challenges the mainstream media narrative surrounding this event with some very specific math. He claims that initially, a bloc led by Alan Cayetano held a clear majority of 13 votes in the Senate, while the bloc loyal to the Marcos administration only had 9. So how in the world did the minority win? According to Tiglao's fierce allegations, the administration used extreme legal coercion to force defections. Step 1? He claims Jingoy Estrada was jailed with his graft case intentionally escalated to plunder, preventing bail, entirely as an example to others. Step 2? Senators Chiz Escudero and Joel Villanueva were allegedly threatened with their own accelerated graft cases. Step 3, all of this pressure forced defections, creating a new 13-vote Marcos bloc that captured the Senate. But here's what really infuriates Tiglao. It's not just the alleged backroom politics. He claims media columnists completely spun this executive overreach, framing it as the survival of democratic institutions. Furthermore, he argues they completely ignored the fact that Gachalian's family conglomerate allegedly relies heavily on the Marcos administration, making him, at least in Tiglao's view, a very easy puppet.
Which brings us to our final section, normalizing the abnormal, and the ultimate function of the corpse.
So what is the ultimate endgame of all this media spin? Tiglao highlights this very specific quote from a Philippine Star columnist who was discussing that Senate takeover. The columnist acknowledges the claims that the administration dangled potential legal cases over senators like a sword of Damocles, but then just casually dismisses it by saying, "Oh, but that's really not something new or outrageous in our banana republic, is it?"
For Tiglao, that quote right there is the smoking gun. It perfectly captures his final thesis. The ultimate function of these organic intellectuals is to make the abnormal seem totally normal. By just shrugging off executive overreach or systemic exploitation as, just life in a banana republic, the media essentially conditions the public to passively accept injustice. It's a mechanism perfectly designed to ensure that the populace doesn't revolt, but rather just accepts a deeply exploitative system with a whimper.
We've covered a lot of really dense, controversial ground today, analyzing Rigoberto Tiglao's assertion that the media essentially acts as a propaganda corp for the ruling class. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder the next time you're consuming your daily news. If our national conversations are indeed manufactured from the top down by a select few with vast resources, how do we as individuals distinguish genuine democratic consensus from normalized injustice? It's a lot to think about. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and thank you so much for joining us for this explainer.